Everything changed the moment Kody Brown walked into the courtroom. For years, millions of people knew him as the father from Sister Wives, the man who appeared on their TV screens every Sunday night, smiling confidently as he talked about family, unity, and faith. Kody Brown was the face of a lifestyle many found shocking, others found fascinating, and some even envied on camera. He was the man who had it all: 4 wives, a large home filled with children, and a sense of control over his unique world. He often looked straight into the lens with a calm smile, presenting himself as someone who had mastered the art of balancing love, marriage, and responsibility. But what viewers didn't know, what the world couldn't see behind those carefully edited episodes, was that a storm was already brewing. A storm that would not only threaten his family's reputation, but also drag him into one of the most difficult battles of his life, inside a courtroom, against laws that had existed for over a century. This wasn't about ratings or television drama anymore. It wasn't about whether Christine felt neglected, whether Mary was lonely, or whether Janelle was tired of playing peacemaker. It wasn't about Robin stepping in as the newest wife, changing the family dynamic forever. No, this was about survival. It was about whether Kody Brown could keep his family safe from the government, from laws written to erase the very lifestyle he had chosen to live. For Kody, the cameras could be switched off, the producers could pack up, but the legal system was a whole different world. And in that world, there were no retakes, no edited storylines, and no second chances. The trouble started quietly. After the first season of Sister Wives aired, the Browns expected criticism, maybe some backlash, but not legal action. They thought America would be curious, maybe even entertained, by their story. And in many ways, it was. The show became a hit. But with fame came attention, and with attention came scrutiny. The state of Utah, where the Browns lived at the time, was strict about polygamy. Even though Kody was only legally married to Mary, and the other marriages were spiritual unions, the law still considered their way of life a potential crime. At first, the Browns tried to brush it off. After all, there were other polygamist families in Utah, some far more secretive than theirs. But the problem was, none of those families were broadcasting their lives to millions of people every week on national television. Kody had put his family on display, and now prosecutors were taking notes. Rumors began to spread that an investigation was underway. The family felt the weight of eyes watching them. Not just the audience at home, but the government itself. Imagine the fear, knowing that any knock on the door could be the start of something disastrous. The children, though young, sensed the tension. The wives whispered in kitchens late at night. And Kody, he began to realize that his decision to open his family to the world might be the very thing that would tear it apart. That fear eventually drove the Browns to make a life-changing decision. They would pack up everything and leave Utah behind. Las Vegas became their new home, a city that thrived on freedom, on difference, on excess. To outsiders, it looked like a fresh start. On camera, Kody presented it as an exciting move, a chance to build a new life. But inside, the family knew the truth. They hadn't moved for opportunity. They had fled for safety. The courtroom, however, was still waiting. Kody Brown decided he wouldn't just run. He wouldn't just live in fear, always wondering if the law would come knocking. Instead, he would fight back. He and his wives filed a lawsuit against the state of Utah, challenging its anti-polygamy laws. It was a bold move, one that shocked both fans and critics alike. For years, polygamist families had kept to the shadows, staying quiet, staying hidden. Kody did the opposite. He walked straight into the spotlight of the legal system and demanded change. When he stepped into the courtroom for the first time, the cameras weren't there. There was no TLC producer guiding the scene, no soft background music, no carefully placed dramatic pauses. It was cold, tense, and real. Lawyers presented arguments, judges asked sharp questions, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. If the Browns lost, they risked more than embarrassment. They risked criminal charges, the possibility of being separated, even the fear that their children could one day be taken from them. Inside the courtroom, Kody's usual charm seemed heavier, burdened by the reality that this wasn't about appearances anymore. This was about proving that his family had the right to exist. His wives sat nearby, each one silently wrestling with their own thoughts. Mary, the first wife, who had once legally bound herself to Kody, watched with a mix of loyalty and quiet sadness. Janelle, always practical, worried about the financial weight of such a legal fight. Christine, the one who often struggled the most with sharing her husband, wondered if this battle was worth the pain it was causing at home. And Robin, the newest wife, who had joined the family under such public scrutiny, sat determined, knowing that she and her children had as much at stake as anyone. The judge listened, the lawyers argued, and then, against all odds, the Browns tasted victory. In 2013, a federal court ruled in their favor, striking down key parts of Utah's anti-polygamy law. For the first time, it seemed like Kody had beaten the system. The Browns celebrated, not on camera, but privately, away from the show's scripts and editing. They felt safe. They felt vindicated. But victories in the legal world are rarely permanent. The state of Utah appealed, and in 2016, the case was thrown out on technical grounds. The court ruled that the Browns didn't have enough reason to claim they were truly in danger of prosecution. In one swift decision, their win vanished. The relief they had felt turned back into fear and frustration. The law hadn't changed after all. They were back where they had started, living a life that could be questioned at any moment. That back and forth in court didn't just affect their legal status. It carved deep wounds into the family itself. The stress was unbearable. Kody had spent years fighting the law, but in the process, he had neglected something else. The fragile bonds between his wives. The trust, already stretched thin by jealousy, financial strain, and the natural difficulties of polygamy, began to crumble. Christine eventually walked away, choosing freedom over the constant battles. Janelle followed, finding independence outside the chaos. Mary, though she had been with Kody the longest, finally admitted the marriage had been empty for years. And so the family that once stood united in a courtroom, demanding their right to exist, slowly fell apart. When Kody Brown walked into that courtroom for the first time, he thought he was fighting the government. In reality, he was also fighting time, change, and the weight of choices that no legal victory could undo. The judges could strike down laws or uphold them, but they couldn't mend broken trust, heal years of resentment, or keep a family together when its foundation was already cracking. And so, the story of Kody Brown's courtroom battle is more than just a legal drama. It's a story about how fame, faith, and law collided, leaving scars that no amount of television editing could ever hide. It was supposed to be about winning rights and protecting love. Instead, it became a symbol of loss, of sacrifice, and of the painful truth that some battles cost far more than anyone ever imagines. Because in the end, the courtroom didn't just change the law, it changed Kody Brown forever. The question everyone wanted answered was simple. Why did Kody Brown, the smiling father from Sister Wives, end up in court in the first place? The answer takes us back to the early days of the show. When Sister Wives first aired in 2010, people tuned in out of sheer curiosity. 4 wives, 1 husband, 18 children, it was unlike anything else on television. Some viewers admired their faith, others criticized their lifestyle. But for the state of Utah, where the Browns were living at the time, curiosity quickly turned into suspicion. Utah had some of the strictest anti-polygamy laws in the country. Technically, Kody was only legally married to his first wife, Mary, but the law also considered cohabitation with multiple partners a crime. In the eyes of prosecutors, the Browns were breaking the law just by living together as a plural family. At first, the Browns tried to laugh it off. They told themselves that the authorities had bigger problems to deal with than a reality TV family. But the truth was far more serious. The very act of putting their lives on camera had painted a target on their backs. Prosecutors weren't just speculating, they were investigating. Imagine the pressure of that moment. Every time a car slowed down in front of their house, the Browns wondered if it was law enforcement. Every phone call from an unknown number carried the fear of bad news. And in the middle of it all was Kody, trying to convince his wives, his children, and even himself that everything would be fine. But it wasn't fine. Behind the scenes, The family was terrified. The children asked questions that no parent wants to answer. Are we in trouble? Could daddy go to jail? The wives whispered late at night about the risks. And Kody began to realize that their lives were no longer just a family experiment. They had become a legal case waiting to happen. The tension grew so heavy that the Browns made a dramatic decision. They would leave Utah altogether. To the world, they told the story of a fresh start in Las Vegas. But in reality, it was an escape. They weren't chasing opportunity. They were running from prosecution. Still, Kody wasn't the type of man to hide forever. The move may have bought them time, but it didn't erase the fear. Instead of living under constant suspicion, Kody decided to go on the offensive. If the law said their lifestyle was a crime, then he would challenge the law itself. That decision led to one of the most shocking moves in the family's history. They filed a lawsuit against the state of Utah. They argued that the anti-polygamy law violated their constitutional rights to privacy, family, and religious freedom. Suddenly, Kody Brown, the reality star, had become Kody Brown, the activist. This was no longer about ratings. It wasn't about jealousies among wives or kids arguing over chores. It was about whether the government could tell a family how to live. And it was this bold decision, this willingness to take on the law head-on, that dragged Kody and his wives straight into the courtroom. The courtroom was nothing like the warm living rooms and confessional chairs that fans of Sister Wives were used to seeing. There were no cameras to soften the mood, no producers to guide the conversation, and no background music to signal when emotions should run high. This was real, raw, and heavy with consequences. When Kody Brown walked into that federal courtroom, he wasn't just a reality star anymore. He was a man on trial against a system much larger than himself. On one side stood the state of Utah, armed with lawyers, history, and laws that had existed for generations. On the other side sat Kody, his wives, and the life they had built together. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If the Browns lost, the family risked criminal prosecution. They feared fines, imprisonment, and the unthinkable possibility of being torn apart. Imagine the fear of children losing their father, wives being forced to separate, and the family's entire way of life collapsing overnight. This wasn't just about principle, it was about survival. Inside the courtroom, Kody was calm on the outside, but the pressure weighed heavily. He had always been the one to reassure his wives, the one who said everything would be okay. But now he wasn't sure. Every word spoken by the lawyers felt like a stone being added to his shoulders. The family's legal team argued that Utah's anti-polygamy law violated the Browns' constitutional rights. They said the law criminalized private relationships that harmed no one, and that the state had no business interfering in how consenting adults chose to live. The Browns weren't defrauding anyone. They weren't hiding abuse. They were simply living as they believed God intended. The state, however, saw it differently. Prosecutors insisted that laws were laws, and polygamy was still considered dangerous, even if the Browns portrayed their family as happy on television. To them, Kody was no different from generations of polygamists, who had lived in secrecy. The difference was that he had put it all on TV, forcing the state's hand. The tension inside that courtroom was suffocating. Each time a lawyer made a point, the Browns' hearts would sink or lift just a little. Each time the judge leaned forward with a question, silence filled the room. The wives sat together, clutching their hands, their faces pale with worry. For them, this wasn't just a case. It was their life, their marriage, their family's very existence. And then, against all odds, something incredible happened. In 2013, the federal court ruled in the Browns' favor. The judge struck down parts of Utah's anti-polygamy law, essentially saying that the Browns had the right to live as they chose, as long as there was no abuse or fraud. For one shining moment, the Browns felt vindicated. They had stood up to the state and won. The weight lifted from their shoulders. The fear of sirens outside their home, of doors being kicked down, of children crying as police dragged parents away, all of it vanished, at least temporarily. But the courtroom is never a place of permanent victories. The state of Utah wasn't about to let the decision stand. They appealed, and just when the Browns thought they were free, the battle took another sharp turn. In 2016, the higher court dismissed the Browns' case. saying they didn't have enough reason to claim they were in danger of prosecution. It didn't matter that they had fled their home in fear. It didn't matter that their lives had been turned upside down. In the eyes of the court, their case was over. The win was gone. The hope was crushed. And once again, the Browns found themselves back in the shadow of uncertainty. The courtroom fight may have been about laws and rights on paper, but behind closed doors, it was tearing at something far more fragile: the heart of the Brown family itself. At first, the victory in 2013 felt like a moment of triumph. The Browns celebrated quietly, grateful that their way of life had been defended, at least for a while. But even as they smiled for cameras on sister wives, cracks were forming beneath the surface. The stress of the lawsuit had left scars. Kody had poured his energy into battling the state, but in doing so, he had neglected the delicate balance at home. His wives had always struggled with jealousy, with feeling unseen or left out. But the legal war magnified those emotions. Every hour Kody spent in meetings with lawyers was an hour he wasn't spending listening to his wife's concerns. Every dollar spent on legal fees was a dollar that could have gone toward the children, the homes, or the future. Christine, who had often struggled with her place in the family, grew weary of living in constant fear and tension. To her, the fight seemed endless, and Kody's obsession with proving their rights felt like a chain around her neck. Janelle, usually the practical one, worried constantly about money, about how much the legal fight was draining their resources. Mary, who already felt emotionally distant from Kody, saw the battle as another reminder that she and her husband were no longer truly connected. And Robin, the newest wife, carried the pressure of being seen by some as the favorite, yet she too was weighed down by fear for her children's safety. The children weren't untouched either. Though many were too young to fully understand, they could sense the heaviness in their home. Whispers replaced laughter, and anxiety hung in the air. Some asked difficult questions. Why are people saying our family is illegal? Are we bad? Others carried the burden quietly, watching their parents struggle and wondering if their lives would ever feel normal again. The more Kody fought in court, the more distance grew in his home. He had always been the man who claimed to hold everything together, but now he was stretched too thin. The very battle he believed would protect his family was slowly unraveling it from within. When the appeal in 2016 erased their win, the disappointment hit like a hammer. Instead of standing stronger together, the family began to fracture. Resentments that had been hidden came to the surface. The wives, already divided by their own struggles, now had one more reason to question whether Kody's leadership was truly worth following. For Kody, the toll was more than he expected. He had gone into court determined to fight the law, but he hadn't realized that while he was focused on the judge, the real battle was happening at home. A battle he was losing. When the dust settled, Kody Brown was no longer the man who had once proudly stood with 4 wives by his side, presenting himself as the leader of a united plural family. The courtroom battle had changed everything. What was once meant to protect their way of life had instead exposed every weakness, every crack, and every fragile thread holding the family together. Christine was the first to walk away, choosing peace and independence over years of fear, jealousy, and struggle. She found new love, remarried, and built a life that no longer revolved around Kody's vision of family. Janelle, tired of the stress and the endless financial strain, chose her own path too. Mary, the wife who had been with him the longest, finally admitted that their marriage had been broken for years and stepped away as well. And so, one by one, the wives who had once sat beside him in court left, until only Robin remained. The family that had once fought shoulder to shoulder against the state was gone, scattered like pieces of a puzzle that would never fit together again. The children had grown, many of them carving out their own lives far away from the shadow of polygamy. And Kody, he was left facing the question that still lingers today: was it worth it? The legal fight had been about more than laws. It was about identity, faith, and the right to live as they chose. But the price was steep. The Browns may have won a temporary victory in court, but the family itself did not survive the aftermath. For fans, the courtroom saga became one of the most unforgettable chapters of Sister Wives. It proved that reality television can blur into real life in ways that no one expects. Viewers saw a man who once seemed larger than life, brought to his knees not by prosecutors, but by the invisible weight of stress, pride, and fractured trust. And so the legacy of Kody Brown's court battle is complicated. On paper, it was a fight for freedom. In reality, it became the beginning of the end for the family he had built. The government may not have torn them apart, but the courtroom lit a fire that eventually burned through the very bonds that held them together. Today, Kody Brown stands not as the symbol of a thriving plural marriage, but as a reminder of how fragile even the strongest-looking families can be when tested by time, law, and personal choices. The world once watched him walk proudly into a courtroom, ready to take on the state of Utah. But what no one realized was that the real trial wasn't in front of the judge at all. It was inside his home. And that was the one battle he couldn't win. Each argument, each question from the judge felt like a tidal wave crashing over the family. The wives sat side by side, their hands clenched, their eyes heavy with fear. Kody tried to remain calm, to present himself as the strong leader, but even he felt the cracks forming beneath his confidence. He wasn't just defending his right to love, he was defending his children's right to live without fear, his wives' right to feel safe, and his family's right to exist. When the 2013 ruling came down in their favor, the Browns felt an overwhelming wave of relief. For once, it seemed like the world was on their side. They weren't criminals, they weren't fugitives, they were simply a family. For a brief time they celebrated quietly, holding on to each other, grateful that the law had recognized their humanity. But victories in court are rarely permanent. The state of Utah refused to back down. They appealed, determined to overturn the decision. And in 2016, the crushing news came: the case was dismissed. Their legal win was erased. The court decided the Browns didn't have enough reason to claim they were truly in danger of prosecution, despite everything they had endured. It was a devastating blow. The fear they thought they had left behind came rushing back. But something else had changed too. Inside their home, the unity was gone. The years of legal stress had carved deep wounds into the family. Christine, who had long struggled with jealousy and loneliness, began to see the fight as yet another burden she no longer wanted to carry. Janelle, ever practical, grew tired of the financial and emotional strain. Mary, whose relationship with Kody had already been fragile, found even less reason to hold on. One by one, the wives began to step away. By the time the legal dust settled, the family that had once marched into court together was fractured beyond repair. The government hadn't broken them apart, but the battle had left scars that time couldn't heal. Today, only Robin remains by Kody's side. Christine has remarried. Janelle and Mary are carving new lives for themselves. The once mighty plural marriage is no more. And so the legacy of Kody Brown's court battle is bittersweet. On paper, it was a fight for freedom, for rights, for faith. But in reality, it became the spark that revealed just how fragile the family truly was. The courtroom didn't jail them, but it set in motion a chain of events that changed them forever. For fans, the saga remains one of the most unforgettable chapters in the sister wives story. It showed that reality TV is more than scripted drama, that sometimes real life is far harsher, far heavier, and far more costly than anything you can see on screen. And in the end, as Kody Brown looks back at the years of battles fought and losses endured, the haunting question still lingers: was it worth it? The truth is, the court battle was never really about just laws. It was about identity. It was about whether a man could live the way he believed God intended, even if the rest of the world called it wrong. For Kody Brown, that belief drove every decision he made, moving his family across states, filing lawsuits, standing in front of judges, and fighting battles most people would never dare to face. But belief can only carry a person so far. The family that once stood shoulder to shoulder in defiance eventually stood apart, each one carrying their own scars from the fight. Christine, once weighed down by jealousy, walked away and found happiness with someone who saw her as his only partner. Janelle, exhausted from years of tension, embraced independence and peace. Mary, after years of feeling forgotten, finally admitted the truth that her marriage had ended long before she officially stepped away. And Robin, who entered the family with so much hope, found herself as the last one standing, holding on to a vision of plural marriage that no longer existed. For Kody, the irony was painful. He had gone to court to protect his family, but in the end, the courtroom couldn't protect him from what mattered most: the slow unraveling of love, trust, and unity. The judge could strike down laws, but he couldn't mend broken hearts. The lawyers could argue about rights, but they couldn't erase years of resentment. The courtroom could decide the fate of polygamy on paper, but it couldn't decide whether his wives would stay by his side. And so, the story of Kody Brown's courtroom battle is more than just a legal drama. It is a cautionary tale, a story about how fame, faith, and law collided in ways no one could have predicted. A story that reminds us that sometimes the biggest battles are not the ones fought under the bright lights of a courtroom, but the quiet ones fought inside our own homes. Today, fans still ask what if? What if the Browns had never gone on television? What if they had stayed hidden in Utah? What if Kody had chosen peace over battle? Would the family still be together? Would the children have grown up with the unity he always preached about? Or was the breakup inevitable, with or without the courtroom drama? Those questions may never be answered. But one thing is certain: the courtroom didn't just test Kody Brown's lifestyle, it tested his family's strength. And while the laws remain, the family that once walked into that courtroom together is now just a memory of what used to be. Looking back now, the story of Kody Brown in court feels less like a single event and more like a turning point in American television history. Before Sister Wives, polygamy was a subject whispered about in secrecy, hidden in desert communities, or shown in the headlines as scandal and crime. But when Kody stepped in front of the cameras, he shattered that silence. He forced the nation to look at a family that didn't fit the mold. For some, the Browns were pioneers, willing to put their lives on display to prove that love could look different. For others, they were lawbreakers who used fame as a shield. But no matter which side people stood on, one thing was undeniable: Kody had made polygamy part of mainstream conversation. The courtroom battle only amplified that spotlight. It wasn't just about Kody anymore. Every argument in front of a judge, every headline about the lawsuit, every whispered debate among viewers, it all pushed society to ask deeper questions. Should adults have the right to live however they choose? Should the government interfere with personal relationships if no harm is being done? Or does the law have a duty to protect people from lifestyles it believes could be dangerous? The Browns' fight didn't settle those questions once and for all. The laws are still there, and the controversy remains. But the case carved out a space in history. It showed the world what happens when personal faith collides with public law, and when private lives are laid bare for millions to judge. For Kody, the cost was personal. He didn't just lose a lawsuit, he lost the unity of the family he once stood so proudly at the center of. The man who had walked into the courtroom as the confident leader of 4 wives walked out, years later, with only one left by his side. And maybe that is the greatest irony of all. The government didn't destroy Kody Brown's family. The courtroom didn't end his marriages. In the end, it was the pressure, the scrutiny, the unrelenting weight of living under both the spotlight and the law that did what no judge ever could. It broke the Browns apart from the inside. Yet their story remains powerful because it is bigger than just one man, one family, or one court case. It is a reminder that every choice comes with a cost. And for Kody Brown, the choice to step into that courtroom may have changed his family forever. In the end, the courtroom was just 4 walls, a judge's bench, and a stack of papers. But for Kody Brown, it was the place where everything changed. He walked in as the head of a united family, a man determined to fight for his beliefs, and he walked out with victories that slipped through his fingers and a family that would never be the same again. The gavel may have struck to signal the end of the trial, but for Kody that sound echoed much louder. It marked the end of the life he thought he had built. The battle was supposed to protect his wives and children. Instead, it exposed every crack, every weakness, and every hidden wound they carried. Fans still argue about whether Kody was brave or reckless, a visionary or a man blinded by pride. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. He believed in love, in faith, in family. He fought for it with everything he had. But sometimes, even the strongest fights come with consequences that no one can escape. And so, as the lights dim on this chapter of the Sister Wives story, one image remains: Kody Brown, once surrounded by 4 wives and 18 children, now standing in a quieter home, looking back at a courtroom that gave him no jail sentence, no fine, no prison bars, but still managed to take away more than he ever expected. Because in the end, the harshest verdict didn't come from the judge. It came from life itself. Years have passed since the Browns first walked into that courtroom, but the echoes of that fight still linger. For some of the children, those memories are a reminder of fear. The quiet talks late at night, the whispered questions about police and prosecutors. For the wives who left, it's a chapter they'll never forget, a heavy piece of their history they had to carry as they built new lives. And for Kody, it's a story that will follow him for the rest of his days. The courtroom didn't just test the law, it tested loyalty, love, and belief. It forced one family to stand up in front of the world and declare, "This is who we are, and we refuse to be ashamed." But at the same time, it showed just how fragile even the boldest dreams can be. Maybe that's the real lesson in all of this. Families aren't protected by court rulings. They aren't held together by laws, or judges, or even TV cameras. Families are built or broken by the choices people make every single day. For the Browns, the courtroom battle will always be remembered as a fight for freedom. But when the cameras stop rolling and the fans stop debating, what remains is a quieter truth that freedom means nothing without unity, and rights mean little without love. And so the story closes. Not with a gavel, not with applause, but with a simple haunting reminder. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't won or lost in court, they're won or lost at home.